Hello and welcome back to the OTB channel. Now, there are times when we all need specialised tools for maintaining our PCs and our laptops. This could be for disk cloning, managing the partitions on our system, scanning a Windows hard drive for viruses perhaps, or even just clearing a Windows password. There are multiple tools to help you do this, but you can end up with many DVDs and USB sticks, all with bootable versions of these tools. Wouldn't it be good if you could just put them all onto one USB that multi-boots into the tool that you want? That's what this video is about. Now, in my last ramble last week, I mentioned that I would be doing how-tos. And over the course of the last week, a how-to subject cropped up because I've needed to do a couple of things myself. The SSD that I had my Arch Linux installed on was getting a little bit small as that particular distribution is expanding as I create more videos and add more tools to it. So I bought myself a brand new SSD, and I obviously needed to clone that old SSD to the bigger SSD. And I've generally used Clonezilla for that before, and I've just downloaded the bootable ISO and stuck it on a USB drive. But I started thinking about this. Back in the day when I was an IT tech, I used to wander around with a folder full of bootable CDs and DVDs. Well, in this day and age, we've moved on to the USB stick for just about everything. And I just wondered, is there a program out there that can help us to create a multi-boot USB stick that has all the different tools that we want on it? So let me move to the split view and I'll show you what I discovered. This is a page you see in front of you from linuxbabe.com, and she's highlighted 5 apps to create multi-boot USBs which support Linux and Windows. First off is an application called Sardu. It runs on Linux and Windows, but if you download the Linux version, it only supports Linux ISOs. So if you need Windows ISOs on there as well, you'll have to install the Windows version. Tried it. It was okay. It didn't work consistently for me, so I moved on. The next thing I tried was, let's move down, MultiBootUSB. MultiBootUSB is an application that runs on Linux and Windows. It only allows you to install Linux applications. It won't run Windows ISOs, and it doesn't guarantee to support every ISO. But I tried this, and I was generally very happy with the results. I then went on and I installed not multi-system, which is another option there, but a program called Yummy, which I think has been around for quite a while. I seem to remember this being around years ago. Now, it supports BIOS and UEFI, but there is no Linux version. If you want to install this on a USB, you have to download it from on a Windows store, or on a Windows PC, should I say. I did that. I booted into Windows 10 on my laptop and gave it a spin. It was okay, but it was inconsistent. So overall, my experiments took me to this MultiBootUSB. A couple of things flagged up that I quite liked about this. It's cross-platform. You can install it if you wish on Windows, but you can install it on just about any Linux distribution as well. It only runs Linux ISOs, but let's face it, most of the system toolkits out there are built on Linux anyway, so that's not a big issue. But importantly, it also supports UEFI booting as well as standard MBR booting, should I say. It is, of course, free as well, and it seems to be based on Python. When I went to the download page for MultiBootUSB, I was also pleased to see that there are lots of options there. There's a Windows executable, there's a Debian deb file, there's 3 different types of RPM, one for Fedora and its derivatives, one for the likes of OpenSUSE, and one for the likes of Mageia. And they also provide the source code. There's also some unofficial builds, so it's in the AUR if you run Arch, but there's also a Slack build package available, one for Rosa Linux. I've never used Rosa Linux, so don't know a great deal about it. And there's also an eBuild package for Gentoo. So, all good. So I downloaded it and I installed it on my Debian stable system. And I just installed it with GDebi. So I downloaded the deb file, right-clicked, installed with GDebi. It installed whatever dependencies were necessary, and I proceeded to test it out. So once installed, the question was, if I want a true multi-boot toolkit, what am I actually going to install? There are lots of different recovery and rescue toolkits out there. Back in the day, the most popular were things like UBCD boot disk and Hiron's boot disk and the Trinity boot disk. They're getting quite old, and I've tended to follow a distribution called Parted Magic recently, and I've been quite impressed with it. It's new, it's kept up to date. It is a commercial distribution, although all of the software on it is free and open source, but the developer asks for $11 to download it. It's about £8 something. I don't have a problem with developers trying to earn a living, so I got the latest version from the Parted Magic website. Another little distribution that's coming on in leaps and bounds, but it's only at the beta stage currently, is an ISO called Rescatux. This is from the people who did the Supergrub disk. And although it's at beta, development's quite fast, and it uses a wizard-driven interface, which I quite like. So, Parted Magic and Rescatux were 2 ISOs that I wanted to install. I occasionally get asked, as I'm sure many of you do, to try and clean Windows PCs of friends and neighbours. So it was also useful if I had some sort of antivirus rescue kit. Now, Parted Magic does include ClamAV, but I wanted something a little bit more flexible. And so I downloaded a whole range of antivirus toolkits. Luckily, many of them are actually based on Linux. The one that I found worked the best in this MultiBootUSB was the rescue disk from Eset. So once you've installed the MultiBootUSB application, the next thing is to choose your ISOs. So this was a straightforward method of just going to the relevant web pages, and you should see Parted Magic's web page in front of you. It does disk partitioning, disk cloning, data rescue, data erasing if you want to securely erase your old hard drives, which I'm going to put to the test in a few weeks as I have an old computer and I need to upgrade the hard drives. and it will also do benchmarking. It supports, well, EXT2, 3, 4, FAT16, FAT32, NTFS and RISURFs. Does anybody use the riser file system anymore? Not quite sure. And to a more limited extent, it will support ButterFS and exFAT, and also HFS and HFS Plus partitions. It requires an i686 processor, which shouldn't be a problem for most people in this day and age, and only requires 1 gig of RAM or 512 meg in live mode. It supports a whole range of storage devices: SATA, IDE and SCSI, flash memory, SSDs, and even NVMe drives. It has Network Manager installed, and it supports UEFI and MBR booting. So, all good. Rescatux, I will, by the way, leave links to these pages here, is again a straightforward download and a tutorial, and the ISO can be downloaded from their page. Last but not least, I downloaded the ESET SysRescue Live ISO, which is a free download, which is absolutely great. So, how do we go about installing these? Well, you should see on your screens now my desktop, and I have MultiBootUSB open. It's a nice, straightforward, clean interface. The first thing you want to do is to detect the drive that is your USB drive and to select the partition that you've created. In this case, I have a Kingston Data Traveler installed. I've created a single FAT32 partition on the USB stick. It's it's meant to be 16 gig, but it's down as 14.4 here, and I've selected that. You'll see at the bottom here that there's a little menu system. I've already installed Partition Magic. I've already installed ESET SysRescue CD. So I'm going to install here Rescatux. And the way we do that, once we've selected our USB disk, is to simply browse for the image. And actually, I know the image is on my desktop. There it is, Rescatux 0.72 beta. I open it up and I click on Install Distro. It asks me, am I sure? Yes, I'm sure. And off it goes, and it does its stuff. Okay, so that's all finished, and you'll get this little dialogue that comes up saying it's been successfully installed. Just click OK. You'll see it's now in the boot menu. So we have Parted Magic, ESET, and we have Rescatux. If at any point you want to add more programs to your USB stick, you simply insert the USB stick, open up MultiBootUSB, and add the ISO. If you want to uninstall one of these, you simply highlight them and click Uninstall Distro. All well and good, but does it actually work? Well, if I move over to the last tab, which is Boot USB or ISO, you can actually use the program Qemu. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that. It's the one that's spelt QEMU. And as long as you've got that installed on your system, you can test your USB. It allows you to choose your RAM. Unfortunately, it only allows you to choose up to 2 gig. One thing, though, that I struggled with, I had it still set to point to the USB disk partition. It's important that you change that entry to just point to the disk. So not SDD1, but just to SDD. So I installed Qemu. I changed my USB selector disk drop down to SDD, and I'm going to boot and see what happens. And so far so good. We're getting the multi-boot boot screen. And we have a number of options here. We can boot from the hard drive, we can load Grub 2, or we can go down to the individual systems that we've installed and boot them directly. So let's boot Partition Magic and see what happens. Okay, so that was fairly quick. It's booted to this Ncurses interface, and I'm just going to stick with the default settings. And it's unpacking and telling me that it's setting up various things, and so far so good. What it will eventually do is it will boot into a graphical user interface where we can navigate the menu just like any other distro to choose the tools that we want. And hopefully it's going to do that in a second. Here we go. First thing it does is it launches this little interface to set our locale. So I want to set Europe, London, and I'm just going to click OK. Let's see if we can get the screen layout a little bigger. What do I want to set this to? Let's go for 1680 by 1050. Okay. So, there's the Partition Magic screen that you can see. Let's do this full screen. There we go. Right, we're full screen now, and we've got access to the menu. I'm not used to Kimu, so I wasn't quite sure what to do then, but full screen seems to sort it out. So, we've got this little conky over here telling us what we're using, and we've got some links on the desktop. So, we've got a link to a web browser, Mozilla Firefox, which hopefully will start in a minute. We should be connected, given that I'm using a virtual machine. And yes, we are. We go to the standard screen. Let's just make sure I can access something like Google. Yeah, all good. We then have a link to our partition editor, which is going to be gparted. And there you can see that it actually is gparted. We then have a link to Clonezilla for disk cloning. I've actually used this yesterday to do a disk-to-disk copy, and it worked absolutely great. So I'm going to cancel that. We've got a link to erase a hard drive. We've got a disk health application there, which obviously we haven't selected any drive yet, but you'd select your drive and run it. And we have our virus scanner. And as soon as we open the virus scanner, it goes out. This is basically Clam AV. It goes out and it gets all the latest definitions, which is brilliant. So no interaction at all required from ourselves. So once the updates have downloaded, and it takes a little while, you get this Clam TK interface. Yes, it is Clam TK. And you can scan a file, scan a directory, do whatever you need to do, which is nice to have it on board. If you're, oops, it's come up again. If you are going to scan a Windows directory, you would first go to this little picture of a disk down in the menu, click on that and mount the disk. I found that it mounted NTFS partitions fine on a Windows 10 system as long as I had disabled fast boot. If fast boot wasn't disabled, it would only mount them read-only. So, mount your Windows partition and scan away. There's a whole range of other tools here. There's benchmarking tools, bootloader restore utility. I actually overwrote my grub screen on my laptop, which dual boots Windows 10 and Debian, just to test things out. And I ran this, and where are we? And hit bootloader restore utility, and it asked me to select which disk. I picked the disk where my root partition was. Obviously, we're using Kimu here, so it's not going to be relevant. And it did indeed put grub back in place. So it's a quick way if Windows, it doesn't want to close now, it's a quick way if Windows overwrites your grub to quickly put grub back in. What else is here? There's a range of tools for encrypted disks, number of file managers, multimedia applications, including ISO file editor, which is probably going to be the most useful, and even simple screen recorder if you want to test what you've actually done. And here we have our rescue apps, including, right at the beginning, change Windows password. I wasn't sure if this would work on a Windows 10 system, but actually I launched it and asked it to clear the Windows password, and it did that. No problem at all, so I can confirm it worked on my Windows 10 system. You then have things like DD Rescue, Photo Rec, Test Disk, and other applications that you can utilize and read about separately if you want to try and rescue damaged data or deleted data or damaged partitions off a system. And then you've got your standard sort of system files. The main thing for this, though, as far as I'm concerned, is it gives you a mobile version of gparted. It allows you to securely erase disks. It allows you to clone disks, and you can also do virus scanning. So that's Parted Magic. I really like the interface. Everything's really up to date, and for me, it's as good as, if not better, than the other boot CDs that are out there, including System Rescue CD, which is another option. So let's log out and turn off. Okay, so let's boot that again, the USB. We also have Rescatux. Let me boot it from here, and it failed to boot. Now, I'm glad you saw that, because what I have found sometimes is that picking the link itself doesn't work. But if I load the Grub2 boot manager and choose the system from there, it suddenly works. So there's Rescatux. I shall boot that from Grub, and we'll see what happens when this is up and running. So as soon as it boots into the GUI, it asks us, do we want to change our monitor settings? I'm just going to say, well, let's say yes. What do I want it to run at? Let's choose 1680 by 1050 and apply. Are the current settings okay for you? Yes, they are. Do you want to change your language? No, not at the moment. Do you want to change your keyboard layout? Not at the moment, thanks. Do you want to keep the VNC server running? No, I don't need to at the moment. Okay, Rescatux Startup Wizard has been completed. Press Start or press OK to start Rescap. Now, Rescap is the wizard system. And you will get this little self-test window. Just click Start. And what you will get is this list. This nice list of tools where it's just simply a case of clicking on the button. Easy GNU Linux boot fix, change UEFI boot order, UEFI partition status, create a UEFI boot entry, hide Microsoft Windows UEFI. Very nice. There's then grub fixes there to restore, to update menus, to check the BIOS grub partition on GPT. You can do a file system check. You can change your Linux password, regenerate the sudo as file if there's a problem, and you can, of course, here also blank the Windows password, just like you could on Parted Magic. So, Parted Magic works good, and Rescatux works good. Let's do the last thing that we want to look at, which is the ESET antivirus tool. I'll boot from USB again. I don't know if this is going to boot straight away from its entry on the Multiboot USB screen, or whether I will have to go into Grub, but let's try it. Okay, run Eset SysRescue, and we'll see it booting. Eset SysRescue automatically mounts any drives that it finds while it's booting, and it's probably more convenient for scanning your Windows partition than perhaps ClamAV. It's certainly a more straightforward interface, as you'll see in a second. When it finally loads, obviously we're only booting here with a couple of gig of RAM. Okay, so once the program starts, click Update to download the latest virus definitions. You have to select one of the options to disable. I have a tendency to disable everything. And then go to Update and update the virus signatures. Once the signatures are updated, which shouldn't take too long, you simply hit On Demand Scan and choose what you want to scan with this SysRescue CD. So that's the virus database updated. I would then go to On Demand Scan and do a custom scan or a smart scan and set everything up. New scan, let's do a custom scan, and you can decide whether you're doing in-depth or just a quick one, and you can select which drive you actually scan. So, all good. I notice also that they have a copy of Gparted on this, which is always good. So that's how to create a multi-booting SysRescue USB with a set of tools on it. On my main USB stick, because the one I've been using to show you was just a test one, on my main USB stick I've also got a copy of Debian Mate on, so that I can install it on machines as I see fit. So a relatively simple process. For me, it's about parted magic, about Rescatux, and about some sort of Windows compatible virus scanner. You choose your own poison. There's lots of options out there. Not all of them are guaranteed to work on the Multiboot USB package, but the only thing you can do really is test them and see. So that's it for today, guys. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell, and I'll see you next week.